Services. We've already covered a lot of this, but it carries out common tasks specific to the entire web application. Services are consumed via the AngularJS dependency injection system. This is one thing that Angular does very, very well, is that once a service exists and has been compiled into your module and your injector knows about it, it's super easy to get that into wherever you need it, whether it's a directive, a controller, or another service. You simply add that as a parameter to the factory function for those items, or the linker function, or whatever. But generally the factory function at the top level when you declare it. And then Angular, using the dependency injection, when you actually need that, it will be like, oh, I totally know what this is. And it will put it in there for you. Why that's important, ultimately, is it decouples your application and it makes it easier to mock out services and test them. I will show you an example of that this afternoon when we get into testing. But in version and control dependency injection, it makes the world go round. Because not only does it allow you to inject only what you need and everything is decoupled, but it makes testing 1,000 million bajillion Brazilian times easier. Services, they're application singletons. So generally you will have one service per an application. Now the caveat is you basically get one service per injector, and you can have more than one injector per application. I don't know why you would need to do that. If somebody can think of a good reason, I would love to hear it, but it is possible. They're also instantiated lazily. Is that what happens is that factory function goes into basically the provider kind of cache, or here, I'll just show you an example. So it's actually the instance factory. So your factory function goes in there, and then something says, hey, I need this service. And it will go and say, do I have a copy of this? Has it already been instantiated? If it has, that's what you get. If not, it'll create a new one. So what will happen is, on your my module, and we've seen something similar to this, is myModule.factory, the name of the module, or the name of the service, and then a factory function defining how that service should behave. And then from there is it gets configured and dropped into the instance factory. And then that's how that works, is do I have one? I need it. If it's already been instantiated, that's what you get. If not, is you get a new instance of the factory method. Does that make sense? Cool. So routes, we are in the home stretch here. They're basically used for matching URLs and deep linking them to a controller and a view. Typically used in conjunction with ngView, and you'll a lot of times use the route params service. So a lot of times the route will look something like boards / board ID. And then whatever that is, route params, that'll exist on route params. And so then you might say var board ID equals route params dot board ID. And so we'll also see an example of that in just a little bit. Ooh, all right. We are through my slides.
A question from the audience.
Yes, sir.
Which is when to use a service versus a factory.
So the answer to that, the question is when to use a service or a factory is, I wish I had a nice kind of easy answer for you. I tend to prefer factories because I think of things as basically objects and methods. But you would use service is if you want it to basically be called via a constructor function. So if you basically want to do like this dot whatever, then if you're comfortable with that syntax, then that's what you would use service for. I use factory because I like the revealing module pattern, where I just return just a set of methods and a data structure. So That's a very nuanced question. I can't think of a practical reason why you would do that. If anybody knows, like, I'm totally up for it. I know Joel Hooks actually just wrote a really good blog post on that, but I've always just defaulted to the factory function because it works incredibly well with, one, the revealing module pattern, and I don't really think of JavaScript in an OOP kind of paradigm anymore. So like, I rarely ever use this. And so having things as a constructor method where you are attaching methods and properties to this object that's just not something I do. And so I can elaborate on that further offline.
Yeah, there's a question on moderator, so you can just fill in
Sure.
a full answer to that.
But I mean, honestly, I think it comes down, it's a very nuanced answer. And you're not going to get like a ton of mileage off one versus the other. So
they're asking to post your previous slide. Oh, but you're gonna email me the slides. You haven't done that yet. No.
Are you sure?
Yeah. I mean, I don't have anything from you.
All right, guys. I'm gonna check my email during the live.
I mean, you can just give me the US. You can just give me the USB, and I'll post it over lunch.
Over lunch, I'll make sure that Mark has my slides. But I think I sent them to him. But is this the slide that they wanted to see?
Yeah.
Okay. Once everybody is good on the slide, we'll actually jump into some code examples. Yes, sir.
Is the route, for each route, does it only link to one controller and one view?
Yes.
Or can it be controlled to multiple?
So that is the limitation. So the question was, for routes, does it link to one controller and to one view? If you're using the Angular implementation of route, so ng route, the answer is yes. It's a one-to-one relationship, which is, depending on what you're doing, can be fairly limited. When I was at Web Filings, that was completely a non-option. Is maybe you only want to update a certain part of your view when your route changes. It's like you don't want to redraw your entire page. Maybe somebody selected a book. So imagine you have a list of books, and then you have like the book details. Is maybe somebody selected a book, and so the route changes for that book. Well, you don't want to have to redraw the entire book list. You already have it. And so that's where we ended up rolling our own, to where we would actually watch using the location service, we would watch that and we would manually update it ourselves. With that said, UI router is actually very powerful, and it works really well. And so I'm using that in a project now. UI router. And that is how you can actually do like kind of, one is complex like nested views that actually map to route. So you can have, you can really get down to in a granular fashion, which is nice. So for all my examples, I'm using ng route because they're fairly simple. But if I was actually doing something, outside of just these simple examples, I would defer to UI router, which is the reason why they actually pulled ng route out of the core in 1.2. So in Angular 1.2, so previously route was actually part of the core, but now they've pulled it out so that you can actually swap it out with UI router or any other routing mechanism you want, which UI router happens to be the best currently that I know of. So that's the alternative, and it's just easy to swap it out. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Cool.